Did you know that hundreds of people vanish from US national parks and forests every single year, and many never to be found? Did you know that the National Park Service doesn't even keep a centralized database for any cases where people go missing? If you go and ask for it, it just never existed. Did you know that in dozens of cases, search dogs lose scent in the middle of a trail, as if a person just vanished? And did you know that sometimes victims are found miles away in impossible places without shoes, and sometimes in places that have been searched dozens of times? In this video, we're going to go into the most unexplained, disturbing, and unsolved cases coming out from the missing 411. In 1996, a German family of 4 decided to visit the US on a road trip. They made a stop in Death Valley National Park. They decided to rent a van as they were going on their trip. The van was later discovered by rangers, with the entire family missing. All the tires were flat, there were toys in the van, and a tent that were not used or taken anywhere. A search party of up to 200 people was dispatched looking for this family. The only remains that were found were skeletal remains of both of the parents. The children, as you will see in many of these cases, were missing. The only remain found from any of the children was a missing sole from one of the shoes. Hikers going missing is nothing new. I'm sure that many national parks have had incidents where search parties were dispatched and people were found. The interesting part about this one is that it was clearly a tourist family and they didn't take any of their belongings with them. Their tent was still there, toys for the kids were there. It is as if they heard something or decided to run from something. The remains of both parents were found in 2009. So some 10 plus years later. Even if you look at these theories of what happened, we look at pop tires. There was a full tire found in the minivan which was not used. You would assume that if one of the tires got popped, they would try to at least do something. They had kids with them, and these are tourists. Tourists wouldn't just go wandering off into places that they have no idea what the local area is. They're here for the first time, and especially in a national park like Death Valley, it's really rare for somebody to just decide to wander off, especially with 2 kids. The remains of the parents were found about 2 to 3 miles away from the minivan, and even if the parents decided to go looking for help, it doesn't make any sense to go into a direction that is new to them. Like anybody, you would probably walk backwards from where you came from because you know that at some point you were in a local area where there were people, where you were getting supplies. The kids were probably small. For kids to just walk with their parents in the heat for 2 to 3 miles, that's also really rare. Usually, if it's a family of 4, the classic thing to do would be leave the mom with the kids near the car, and then the dad would go out looking for help. This just sparks more theories and debates. What happened? Why did they all decide to leave? Why didn't they take anything? What happened to the car? How were all 4 tires popped? Why did they decide to go venture off 2 to 3 miles away from the minivan instead of where they came from? In 1978, a group of 5 men played a basketball game from Yuba County, California. On their way home, they decided to take a detour through Plumas National Forest. Their car was later found completely abandoned. What's important to note about this one is that each one of these 5 men suffered some kind of intellectual disability or psychiatric disability. That's important for the story, and you'll see it later. Their car was later found abandoned, and what's interesting about it is that it was in perfectly good order to drive. There was some gas still left in the tank, and there were no mechanical failures. The doors and everything was unlocked, and the keys were missing, which was very unusual for the driver, Jack Madruga. 4 months later, after the snow started melting and search parties were dispatched, bodies started getting revealed. The first body, Ted Weyer, found inside a Forest Service trailer about 20 miles away from the car. He had died from a combination of starvation and hypothermia, despite an ample supply of food and heating materials in the nearby trailer. He had not used any of them. The second body, the driver, Jack Madruga, found about 11.5 miles away from the trailer. His body had been partially consumed by animals and only bones remained. He died from hypothermia. Bill Sterling, found near Madruga. His remains were also scattered over a small area due to animals, and he as well died from hypothermia. Jack Hewitt, found about 2 miles from the trailer. His body was identified by his shoes and jeans. He had also died from hypothermia. And the last body of Gary Mathias was never found. Now this story gets a little creepier as you go deeper into it. Ware's body was found wrapped up in 8 sheets, including his head, on a bed inside the trailer. The trailer's fireplace had not been used at all, despite an ample supply of matches and paperback novels. Heavy forestry clothing was also in the trailer, untouched by the group. Considering it was February and it was really cold, and considering most of them died due to hypothermia, you would assume that the fireplace and the clothing would have been at least touched or used in some sort of way. Some believe that foul play could be at hand. Why were so many of them scattered around the trailer? Many of them were found miles and miles away from it. You would assume that a group of 5 would have kept together as soon as they left the car. Or did something make them scatter? We also can't exclude psychological factors. A few of these men were war veterans, so it's very possible that something could have set them off and maybe relive some of the PTSD they could have experienced. It definitely sounds like the group got scared by something and maybe a bunch of them scattered, considering that they were found miles apart. A few of them were together. Nonetheless, nothing was touched in the trailer. No clothing, no fireplace, nothing. So it's very possible that they scattered, freaked out, froze, which is why they died of hypothermia. Lastly, many people question why the body of the 5th member was never found. Even the bodies that ended up being consumed by animals were identified by DNA, clothing, even bodies that were found miles apart. There's still one missing, and you have to ask the question of what happened. How far away was this person? Did he ever survive? Or did something more sinister happen? This next one is actually really creepy, especially if you take a moment and imagine yourself being there. It's probably a more simple one compared to the other 2 that we just talked about, but me personally, just imagining this story really freaks me out. This is a story of Dennis Martin, a boy that went missing in the Smoky Mountain National Park in Tennessee in 1969. The Martin family decided to take a hike and go camping for Father's Day weekend. The Martin family decided to set up camp before they continued their hike in the morning. Dennis and his older brother were playing around the campsite, where Dennis decided to run into a bush to scare his family by jumping out of it. His brother last saw him running towards the bush, never to emerge again. The search for Dennis became the largest in the history of Great Smoky Mountain National Park, involving approximately 1,400 searchers. Despite extensive efforts, no trace of Dennis was found. This search was officially closed on September 14th, approximately 3 months after his disappearance. I imagine that the bush couldn't have been far. I know a lot of people might think that the kid ran into some really far away bush and something might have got him from the back, an animal of some sort, but considering the brothers were playing near the campsite and it was a family getaway for Father's Day weekend, you have to assume that they were playing nearby. And just the visual idea of someone you know running into a bush in a forest and never coming out is just so eerie. Usually if it's an animal or some kind of struggle, you would hear it. Obviously, if it's a little kid, the animal wouldn't have that much trouble getting him out or eating him or grabbing him, whatever it may be. Yet it doesn't sound like animals were even suspected in any of this. And the fact that 56 square miles were covered without a single trace of this boy, considering again, many of these stories where kids go missing, kids disappear. How many miles can a kid really cover in a national park? It's usually parents who could withstand a bigger load of walking for miles and miles. A child usually gets tired, especially if they're making camp. It's towards the evening. They want to set up, go to bed, wake up, and continue their journey. So you have to ask yourself, what could have happened to Dennis and why was nothing ever found? Obviously, it was 1969. It was a different time. Technology isn't what it is now. I assume that, not all of these national parks have the capacity of sending search helicopters, but dogs were used, and considering 1,400 people were out there looking for him, most probably a lot of them were experienced searchers. Again, people go missing in national parks. People wander off. This happens all the time. Yet they couldn't find this little kid who had just vanished. And to this day, it remains a mystery what happened to him. This next case is a very disturbing and creepy one as well. It takes us to Padres Canyon, Colorado, where a 3-year-old Jared went missing. Jared went hiking with his dad and their church group. Now, on their hike, Jared wandered off a little bit ahead of the group, which some kids do, and the only thing that was heard from him was a scream before he vanished. Many theories started circulating. Did he topple over and get into a river, the river sweep him away? Was it an animal? Which is exactly what the national park went with. They believed that it was a mountain lion attack. This was the official story until more disturbing evidence came to light. This is something that David Paulides pointed out in his book, Missing 411. Paulides points out some evidence found during the search for Jared. Notably, a piece of Jared's tooth was discovered placed on a log, and his trousers were found inside out. These details, along with the absence of blood on his clothing, led Paulides to question the official explanation of a mountain lion attack. If you believe that an animal had something to do with his disappearance, and the official story how he screamed before he was never to be seen again, I think the go-to theory would have to be some kind of animal attack or maybe even abduction. Although I would imagine it would be very easy to see somebody trying to abduct a child, especially on a trail. So the evidence that came out later on was very disturbing. DNA testing ended up confirming that the remains were Jared's, and Paulides and others noted that the circumstances surrounding the discovery were very unusual. The remains were found years after the initial searches, which made some questions arise as to how this was possible. The initial searches proved to be unsuccessful. Nobody could find a trace of where Jared went. Nobody knew what happened, and even the attack from an animal was more of a scapegoat into what this could have been. It feels like a national park can blame almost anything on an animal, and this is why this is another interesting one, is because you have this repeating theme of children going missing, and not just missing, but it almost feels like they just vanish. And the evidence that's left behind just brings us more questions. Why was there a piece of tooth on a log? Why were his trousers inside out? And there was no blood? As somebody who was reading this, I almost imagined that a 3-year-old boy couldn't have been that far away from the group that was hiking with him. I imagine that the dad didn't just let him wander off 100 feet, 300 feet away from them. He had to have been within eyesight, and a mountain lion would have been something that they would have heard or at least seen. And similar to an abduction story, unless there's something deeply disturbing with the official story. This might be one that we will never know, but the evidence left behind is deeply disturbing. And the fact that the database for missing cases is so lacking just makes us wonder how many more people have gone missing with really, really strange stories. And yet we'll probably never know them. Our last case takes us to Alfred Beilhartz, back to Colorado, specifically Rocky Mountains National Park. Like many of these cases, the official story is very simple and straightforward. Alfred went fishing with his parents and ended up disappearing without a trace. Despite intensive searches, including draining rivers and combining large areas, no physical evidence of him was found. This happened in 1938, so obviously the technology that was used and the resources that the parks had was vastly different than what it became later on, 50 odd years later. And obviously this is almost 100 years ago, so we can't expect too much, except there's one really eerie fact from this case. Later hikers claimed to have seen a young boy on a ledge in the park, and according to them, the boy appeared to be pulled back by someone unseen. Now your instant reaction is, where were his parents? How did this happen without anyone seeing it? And this is where it gets a little weird, because there's no official story. Some people believe that he trailed off a little bit. He was walking either behind them or a little ahead, similar to the other story, and ended up being potentially abducted, if we're going by what the witnesses say. I think the worst part about all of this is that even almost 100 years ago, not much has really changed. Even with the new wave of technology, we still have cases of people going missing in national parks without a trace. And you would think that going back 100 years, they would have developed a database to at least keep track of this. Yet none exist. And obviously, these are just 5 hand-picked cases that I think were really creepy. There are more, and I encourage you to go look for them. There's a lot of them that you could read where people just disappeared in place, found miles away from their clothing, dogs losing scent in the middle of a trail. There are a lot of these anomalies that happen that nobody really talks about. When we think about people going missing, we kind of stop because it's not really reported anymore. You know, back in the day, we used to have those milk cartons where they would have missing children's posters and stuff like that. When's the last time you really saw one? When's the last time the news really reported it? When you look at the numbers of how many kids go missing every year, and many of them are found, it just sparks questions as to, is there something really going on that we should all know about? How is it possible that these kids go missing in parks? And often these cases are very similar. It's either abductions, and obviously when you look at it without a tinfoil hat on or something like that, you want to believe that it's just misadventure. Somebody fell down a river, an animal attack, and nothing really sinister going on. But you still have to wonder, is there more to this than really we know? And just reading some of these stories, me personally, I think there's just something deeper in there for sure. It gets a little kookier. Obviously, there are people who believe aliens and other abduction stories. But like I said, there's so many cases out there, and you really should read into some of them and make up your own mind. So thank you for watching this video. If you'd like, let us know in the comments which one of these cases is really disturbing, or maybe you have a possible theory as to what happened, and maybe these aren't really that scary at all. It'll be interesting to know what you guys think. And please don't forget to like, share, subscribe. It really helps the channel grow and just produce more content. So we'll see you guys next time.